David Crockett was a Tennessee frontiersman and a complex American figure who became one of the most legendary personalities of the early 19th century. David Crockett, frontiersman, soldier, politician, and folk hero, was born in Greene County, Tennessee on August 17, 1786. He came from a humble family. He had a distinctive presence with his frontier clothing and coonskin cap. Crockett's early years were marked by hardship and self-reliance. He received minimal formal education, attending school for only a few days before running away to avoid punishment from his father. His youth was spent working various jobs to help support his family and later to pay off his father's debts, though his later life would test his character in the most challenging ways imaginable. After his brief and troubled schooling, Crockett worked as a cattle drover, traveling hundreds of miles through the wilderness. He learned the skills of frontier survival during these journeys. He became an expert hunter and marksman, abilities that would serve him throughout his life. It was during these formative years that Crockett developed his understanding of the American frontier and the people who inhabited it. In 1806, Crockett married Polly Finley, and they settled in Tennessee to begin farming. He was not a natural farmer, finding the work tedious compared to hunting and exploring. The couple had 3 children together before Polly died in 1815. Her death was a devastating blow to Crockett, leaving him alone with young children to raise. He remarried quickly, wedding Elizabeth Patton, a widow with 2 children of her own. The combined family moved several times, always pushing further into the frontier territories of Tennessee. Crockett's military career began in 1813 when he enlisted as a scout in the Tennessee militia during the Creek War. He served under Colonel John Coffee and later under General Andrew Jackson. The Creek War was part of the larger conflict of the War of 1812, though it focused specifically on conflicts with the Creek Nation in the southeast. Crockett's service took him through Alabama and Florida territories. He participated in several engagements, including the campaign that culminated in the Battle of Horseshoe Bend in March 1814. However, Crockett was not present at that decisive battle, as his enlistment term had expired and he had returned home. His military service was competent but not particularly distinguished. He served as a scout and hunter, providing game for the troops rather than engaging in direct combat leadership. Nevertheless, his service gave him valuable experience and connections that would prove useful in his later political career. After the Creek War, Crockett returned to Tennessee and began involving himself in local politics. He was appointed a magistrate in 1817, despite his lack of formal education and legal training. His common-sense approach and frontier humor made him popular with his constituents. In 1821, he was elected to the Tennessee State Legislature, representing Lawrence and Hickman counties. This marked the beginning of his political career, though he approached politics with the same straightforward, unpolished style that characterized his frontier life. Crockett's political philosophy was simple and consistent. He believed in representing the interests of the common people, particularly the poor farmers and settlers of western Tennessee. He opposed land speculation and policies that favored wealthy landowners over small farmers. His positions often put him at odds with more established politicians, including his former commander Andrew Jackson, who was rising to national prominence. In 1825, Crockett ran for the United States House of Representatives but was defeated. The loss was disappointing, but he learned from the experience. He realized that his folksy charm and hunting stories resonated with voters. 2 years later, in 1827, he ran again and won, beginning his first term in Congress. Crockett arrived in Washington as a curiosity, a genuine frontiersman among the educated elite of the capital. His appearance, manner of speaking, and storytelling ability made him a novelty. He played up his backwoods image, understanding that it gave him a unique identity in Congress. However, beneath the frontier persona was a man with genuine political convictions and a stubborn independence that would define his congressional career. During his first term, Crockett supported measures to help poor farmers and settlers. He introduced legislation to allow squatters in Tennessee to purchase the land they had settled at reduced prices. The bill was controversial because it challenged the interests of land speculators and wealthy investors. Crockett fought persistently for his land bill, even though it made him enemies among powerful interests. His dedication to this cause demonstrated that his political commitments went beyond mere showmanship. He was re-elected in 1829, serving a second term. During this period, his relationship with Andrew Jackson, now president, deteriorated completely. Crockett opposed many of Jackson's policies, most notably the Indian Removal Act of 1830. While most Tennessee politicians supported removing Native Americans from their lands, Crockett voted against the act, arguing it was unjust. This principled stand cost him politically, as Jackson was immensely popular in Tennessee. The break with Jackson proved costly. In the 1831 election, Crockett was defeated, partly due to opposition from Jackson supporters. He returned to Tennessee, but he was not finished with politics. In 1833, he ran again and won, returning to Congress for a third term. By this time, Crockett had become a national celebrity. His opposition to Jackson had made him attractive to the Whig Party, which was forming in opposition to Jackson's Democrats. The Whigs saw Crockett's frontier image and popularity as useful for their cause. They encouraged him to tour the Northeast, where he was received enthusiastically. He visited Philadelphia, New York, and Boston, where crowds gathered to see the famous Frontiersman. During this tour, a book was published under his name, though largely ghostwritten, titled A Narrative of the Life of David Crockett. The book enhanced his legend, presenting him as the embodiment of American frontier virtues. However, Crockett's political career was coming to an end. His opposition to Jackson remained firm, but it made him increasingly unpopular in Tennessee. His land bill continued to fail in Congress, frustrating his main legislative goal. In 1835, he ran for re-election but was defeated by Adam Huntsman, a Jackson supporter. The loss was bitter. Crockett had served 3 terms in Congress but had little to show for it legislatively. His land bill had never passed, and his opposition to Jackson had made him a political outsider in his own state. According to legend, Crockett told his constituents they could go to hell and he was going to Texas. While the exact words are disputed, the sentiment was accurate. Disappointed and politically defeated, Crockett decided to leave Tennessee and start anew in Texas. In the fall of 1835, Crockett set out for Texas with a small group of companions. Texas was then part of Mexico but was populated largely by American settlers who were growing increasingly dissatisfied with Mexican rule. Tensions between the Texan settlers and the Mexican government under President Antonio López de Santa Anna had been building for years. Issues of governance, taxation, immigration, and slavery created conflict. By the time Crockett arrived in Texas in January 1836, the situation was moving toward open rebellion. Crockett's reasons for going to Texas were mixed. He was certainly seeking a fresh start after his political defeats. He may have been interested in acquiring land, as Texas offered opportunities for settlers. He was also drawn by the adventure and the chance to be part of something significant. Some accounts suggest he hoped that service in Texas might revive his political career, perhaps even leading to a role in governing a new republic or state. Crockett arrived in Nacogdoches, Texas in January 1836 and signed an oath of allegiance to the Provisional Government of Texas. He was received enthusiastically, as his fame had preceded him. The Texan leaders were eager to have such a well-known figure join their cause. Crockett and his companions traveled to San Antonio de Bexar, where Texan forces were garrisoned at an old Spanish mission called the Alamo. The Alamo was not an ideal defensive position. It was too large to be adequately defended by the small Texan force, and it was isolated from other Texan settlements. However, the Texan commander, Lieutenant Colonel William Travis, had decided to hold the position. When Crockett arrived at the Alamo in early February, the garrison numbered fewer than 150 men. Among them were Travis, James Bowie, and a mix of Texan settlers and American volunteers. On February 23, 1836, Mexican forces under General Santa Anna arrived at San Antonio and laid siege to the Alamo. The Texan defenders were vastly outnumbered. Santa Anna's army numbered in the thousands, and more troops were arriving daily. The siege began with artillery bombardment and skirmishing. The Texans sent messengers requesting reinforcements, but help was slow to come. Travis wrote several letters during the siege, including his famous victory or death letter, appealing for aid. The defenders knew their situation was desperate, but they chose to hold their position. Crockett's role during the siege is not entirely clear from historical records, but accounts suggest he helped maintain morale with his stories and humor. He participated in the defense, likely as a sharpshooter given his reputation as a marksman. The siege lasted 13 days. During this time, the defenders repelled several Mexican probes and endured constant artillery fire. Conditions inside the Alamo deteriorated as supplies dwindled and casualties mounted. On March 1, a small group of 32 men from Gonzales managed to slip through Mexican lines and reinforce the garrison, bringing the total defenders to about 185 men. It was the only reinforcement the Alamo would receive. Santa Anna, frustrated by the prolonged siege of such a small garrison, decided to launch a final assault. Before dawn on March 6, 1836, Mexican forces attacked the Alamo from multiple directions. The assault began around 5:30 in the morning. The Texan defenders fought desperately, but they were overwhelmed by sheer numbers. Mexican soldiers scaled the walls and broke through the defenses. The battle became a series of desperate hand-to-hand combats throughout the mission compound. Within about 90 minutes, the battle was over. The Mexican army had captured the Alamo, but at significant cost. Estimates of Mexican casualties range from several hundred to over 1,000 killed and wounded. The Texan defenders were annihilated. Nearly all the fighting men were killed, along with several non-combatants. The exact circumstances of Davy Crockett's death have been debated by historians for generations. According to the traditional account, promoted in the 19th century, Crockett died fighting, surrounded by Mexican soldiers, with his rifle used as a club after he ran out of ammunition. This version emphasized his courage and fighting spirit, fitting the heroic legend that had grown around him. However, other accounts, including a diary attributed to Mexican officer José Enrique de la Pena, suggest that Crockett was among a small group of defenders who survived the battle but were executed shortly afterward on Santa Anna's orders. The question of how Crockett died remains controversial. The traditional version appeals to those who prefer a heroic narrative, while the execution account is supported by some historical evidence but disputed by others. What is certain is that Davy Crockett died at the Alamo on March 6, 1836. He was 49 years old. His body, like those of the other defenders, was burned by Santa Anna's orders. There is no grave, no remains to mark his final resting place. The fall of the Alamo shocked Texas and the United States. The deaths of Crockett, Travis, Bowie, and the other defenders became a rallying cry for the Texan Revolution. Remember the Alamo became the battle cry of Sam Houston's army, which defeated Santa Anna at the Battle of San Jacinto 6 weeks later, securing Texas independence. Crockett's death at the Alamo transformed him from a controversial politician and frontier celebrity into an American legend. In death, he became the embodiment of frontier courage and sacrifice. The manner of his death, whether fighting to the last or executed as a prisoner, became less important than what his death represented. He had died defending liberty against tyranny, or so the narrative went. In the decades following his death, Crockett's legend grew exponentially. Almanacs bearing his name published wildly exaggerated tales of his exploits. These Crockett almanacs, published from the 1830s through the 1850s, featured stories of impossible feats, encounters with wild animals, and frontier humor. While these publications had little to do with the real David Crockett, they shaped how Americans thought of him. The legend was further enhanced by plays, dime novels, and later by films and television. In the 20th century, Walt Disney's television series about Davy Crockett, starring Fess Parker, created a cultural phenomenon in the 1950s. Millions of children wore coonskin caps and sang the Ballad of Davy Crockett. This popularization cemented certain images and stories about Crockett in American culture, even though many were historically inaccurate. The real David Crockett was more complex and interesting than the legend suggests. He was not particularly well educated, but he was intelligent and politically astute. He understood how to use his frontier image for political advantage, yet he also held genuine convictions that he refused to compromise. His opposition to Andrew Jackson and the Indian Removal Act showed moral courage, even when it cost him politically. Crockett was also a man of contradictions. He promoted himself as a simple frontiersman while actively cultivating celebrity and political power. He claimed to represent the common people but was not above using his fame for personal advantage. He opposed Indian removal but participated in military campaigns against Native Americans. He left his family repeatedly to pursue political ambitions and adventures. These contradictions do not diminish him but rather make him more human and understandable. Modern historians have worked to separate the man from the myth. They recognize that Crockett was a skilled politician who understood public relations before the term existed. He was genuinely popular with common voters because he spoke their language and represented their interests, at least on issues like land policy. He was also capable of growth and change, as shown by his evolution on Native American issues. His military career, both in the Creek War and at the Alamo, was that of a competent soldier rather than a great military leader. He was brave and willing to fight, but he did not demonstrate exceptional tactical or strategic ability. His value at the Alamo was probably more symbolic than military. His presence gave the defenders credibility and attracted attention to their cause. His death there ensured that the Alamo would be remembered and that the Texas Revolution would gain support. Crockett's legacy is primarily as a symbol rather than for his actual accomplishments. He served 3 terms in Congress but passed no significant legislation. He was a capable frontiersman but not uniquely so among his contemporaries. He died in a military defeat, not a victory. Yet he became one of the most famous Americans of the 19th century and remains a recognizable figure today. This transformation from man to myth reveals something about American culture and values. Crockett represented qualities that Americans admired: independence, courage, humor, and a distrust of established authority. He was seen as authentic, a real man of the people in contrast to polished politicians and Eastern elites. Whether the real Crockett fully embodied these qualities is less important than the fact that Americans believed he did and wanted to celebrate those values through him. The Crockett legend also reflects the American fascination with the frontier. As the country expanded westward, the frontier became central to American identity. Frontiersmen like Crockett represented the vanguard of civilization, brave individuals who ventured into the wilderness and tamed it. This narrative overlooked the violence done to Native Americans and the environmental destruction of expansion, but it was powerful nonetheless. In assessing David Crockett's life and legacy, we must distinguish between the historical figure and the mythical hero. The historical Crockett was a moderately successful politician, a competent frontiersman, and a man who died in a failed military defense. He had admirable qualities, including political courage and personal bravery, but also flaws and limitations. The mythical Crockett is a larger-than-life hero, the king of the wild frontier, who killed bears, fought Indians, served in Congress, and died heroically at the Alamo. This version is more fiction than fact, but it has had greater cultural impact. Perhaps the fairest assessment is that David Crockett was a man of his time who understood how to capture the public imagination. He was neither the Superman of legend nor a fraud, but rather a capable individual who found himself at significant moments in American history. His service in Congress, while not legislatively successful, gave voice to poor farmers and settlers. His opposition to Jackson showed independence and principle. His death at the Alamo, whatever the exact circumstances, was in service to a cause he had chosen to support. These are not small things. Crockett's personal life was marked by loss and restlessness. He lost his first wife and several children. He moved repeatedly, never quite finding the success or contentment he sought. His political career ended in defeat and disappointment. He left Tennessee under a cloud, heading to Texas to start over at age 49. There is something poignant about this constant searching, this inability to settle or be satisfied. Yet this restlessness is also very American, the constant push toward new frontiers and new opportunities. In the end, Davy Crockett represents both the reality and the mythology of the American frontier. The reality was often harsh, violent, and disappointing. The mythology was heroic, adventurous, and inspiring. Crockett lived the reality while helping to create the mythology. His life was a mixture of genuine accomplishment and self-promotion, of principle and political calculation, of courage and perhaps foolhardiness. He died in a battle that was both militarily pointless and symbolically crucial. His death at the Alamo ensured his immortality but also froze him in time, forever the frontier hero dying for liberty. We will never fully know the real David Crockett, as the man has been obscured by nearly 2 centuries of legend-making. But we can appreciate both the historical figure and the cultural symbol he became, understanding that both have something to tell us about American history and identity.